Hi, I'm Ruben Saltzman with Structure Tech Home Inspections, and today I'm going to talk to you about inspecting the wiring to an electric water heater. I seem to be on an electrical kick lately. That's okay. So there's three things that we look for as home inspectors when we're looking at the wiring to a water heater. Number one, I'm checking to make sure that the wiring coming in is protected. That means no exposed Romex. And when I say Romex, side note, the technical name for Romex is a brand name. The technical name is NM sheath cable or non-metallic sheath cable, but if I use that term, nobody knows what the heck I'm talking about. So we're saying no unprotected Romex coming into the water heater, or BX for that matter. It's stuff that's about the same width as Romex, but it's just got this tiny little metallic shield going around it. Not supposed to have that stuff unprotected either. What's acceptable would be to have rigid metallic conduit, like hard tubing, coming into the water heater. That's fine. You could have the big, thick flex stuff flexible metal going around the wires coming in. You could even use liquid tight conduit coming in. I don't know why it'd be done, but it's done. People do that too. So any of those is perfectly acceptable for the wiring coming into the water heater. We just can't see unprotected cables coming in. So that's step number one. Number two, we need to have a way of disconnecting the power to the water heater. There's two ways that you could accomplish that. One would be a switch right next to the water heater. You know what, it doesn't even need to be right next to the water heater. It just needs to be within sight of the water heater. So if someone installed a special switch, it's probably going to be really close. That's going to feed the wires coming into it. It could be the circuit breaker at the main panel, provided the panel is in the same room and it's within sight of the water heater. You could just have a breaker. You don't need anything special. You could call the breaker right there your shutoff. You could have either one of those, or if you don't want to do any of that, probably the easiest thing that people do nowadays on new construction is you simply have a lockout at the breaker at the main panel. And all this is a little piece of metal that slips over the breaker while the panel cover's off. It goes over the breaker, the cover kind of locks it in place, and then it makes it so that if someone were to shut off the power, they could put a lock on that breaker, and they can make sure that somebody isn't going to turn the power back on while they're working on live wires. So that would be a lockout. Either one of those, either a shutoff within inside of the water heater or a lockout at the main breaker, either one of those is acceptable for shutting off the power to the water heater. And then number three, we want to make sure that the circuit is adequately sized. On pretty much all electric water heaters, they're going to have 4,500 watt heating elements. And I'm talking about traditional water heaters for a whole house. I'm not talking about point of use water heaters, little 2-gallon jobbies like I installed under my own kitchen sink. I'm not talking about these. I'm talking about standard water heaters for a house. They typically all have 4,500 watt heating elements. It's going to have one high and one low, and they don't run simultaneously. Either one will run or the other will run, but never both at the same time. So you're never going to have a 9,000 watt load on that water heater. It's always 4,500 watts while it's running. So how do we size that? Well, if you do a little basic electrical math, it's going to be a 240 volt circuit. So we take 4,500 watts, divide that by 240, and it gets us 18.75. That's how many amps it's going to draw. So we should be good with a 20 amp circuit, right? Not so fast. There's actually a section in the electrical code that specifically talks about electric water heaters, section 422.13, and it says if you've got a water heater rated at 120 gallons or less, which is every water heater I've ever seen in any house, if it's 120 gallons or less, then you need to take the rating on the water heater and multiply it by 125%. And that's what you need to go with. So if you take that 18.75 amps that we just calculated and you take 125% of that, that's going to get us approximately 23.44 amps. So that's the minimum circuit ampacity going to the water heater. And standard circuit breakers are you're going to go from 20 amps up to 30 amps. So that's why we always see 30 amp circuits for traditional household water heaters, even though if you do the basic math, it seems like you should be able to get away with a 20 amp circuit. So I'm looking for a 30 amp breaker, and I'm looking for 10 gauge wires going to the water heater. Those are the three basic things. That's not every little thing that we could possibly look for, but those are the most common things that we see wrong as home inspectors, and those are kind of the big three that I'm looking for when it comes to inspecting electric water heaters. All right, I'm Ruben Saltzman with Structure Tech Home Inspections. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.